Joe here from Cask and Kettle Homebrew. I want to talk briefly with you today about grain and why we crush it. Inside each kernel of grain is a starch. The little piece of starch inside is the important part to us as brewers. And our goal is to get to that starch so we can allow the enzymes that are present on the malted barley to work on that starch and turn it into fermentable and non-fermentable sugars that we can use. It's important when we're dealing with grain that we keep a couple of things in mind. We don't want to pulverize the grain and turn it into flour. And we don't want to undercrush the grain because we want enough surface area of the starch internally exposed so we can maximize what we can convert. Generally speaking, when you're milling your grains, the goal is to break open the casing or the husk and expose the starch and break that starch usually into about 3 separate smaller pieces. That's generally regarded as ideal. If you're a brew-in-a-bag brewer, a finer crush will likely benefit you. You don't have to worry about the risks of grain that's too pulverized or too floury sticking when you go to sparge and rinse your grain. So you can get away with a finer crush, which will help give you a lot more surface area and maximize your conversion. Alternatively, depending on your sparging method, if you're batch sparging or fly sparging, and once again, keeping that in mind, you want to tune your crush to best benefit your conversion efficiency. We can talk a lot about that in future videos, but today I really want to just focus on getting these cracked open properly and a couple of methods that you can use at home. If you're lucky enough to have a store nearby like Cask and Kettle Homebrew, we'll crush the grains for you. However, if you do have us crush your grains, you're relegated to our standard in-store crush. It's a middle-of-the-road crush that we find benefits whether you're a brew-in-a-bag brewer or a full fly sparge brewer. If you prefer to tune your crush either to your brewing style or batch to batch, we also carry a couple of different types of mills that you can pick up and use it at home. Here we have our Victoria mill. It's a simple hand crank mill, generally originally designed for pulverizing wheat into flour. If you adjust it properly, it can work very good for home brewing. If you're milling smaller amounts of grain, simple hand crank option like this is great, and it's fairly easy to adjust. So I'm going to demonstrate that for you now with a small amount of grain. I'm going to take our grain and pour it here into the hopper. Inside the hopper at the base here is a screw type auger that as we rotate the handle here, it'll feed the grain down through. And right here beyond this black plate are the 2 crushing plates that rotate against each other. And we use those to shear off the husk and to crack the grain. Right now I have it set all the way out to its loosest setting. And as we start to pass the grain through, you can hear we're getting a little bit of cracking, but we're still pulling a lot of entire whole kernels out. So we kind of have a mixed bag here. We want a little finer than that. It's okay to check your crush each time. Simply begin your crushing cycle and screw in here to tighten down the mill a little bit. We're going to again take a small sample, and we can see we're getting some cracking, and we're getting some of these nice big chunks of the starch. You see here in the white, a couple of pieces here. This size is a pretty good size for what we're looking for. Obviously you're going to get a lot of extra powder, and you may get some errant full kernels in your crush, but what you're looking for is that a majority of it is cracked open, and you're starting to see these 3 and 4 piece breaks in that internal starch. We're going to tighten this down just a tad bit more and try it again. Now we're starting to really get there. We can see we have a lot of husks that are separated and our starch, a lot more starch present there in our sample. We're going to tighten it down just a little bit more, about 2 full turns there. We're going to run it one more time. Still a little bit ways to go. And as you start to get to the perfect sweet spot after you've run a little bit through, you'll actually feel this clamp down on the grain. Once you get to that point, you want to go about another quarter turn and check it one more time. And there we have it. This is, we have our empty husks. We have nice, evenly broken bits of starch. And we're going to go a little bit snugger. And we're going to tighten down our lock. Keep that crush even for the rest of the time. Now, as you see me processing that a lot more rapidly now, again, our husks are nice and separated. Our starch kernels are broken into nice 3 to 4 piece chunks. A nice even crush. Everything looks uniform. And we can finish this off. We'll run it till we've processed all the grain. On a mill like this, you may find there's still a handful of kernels present in the bottom. If you lose a couple of kernels during your crush, it's not the end of the world. It shouldn't have any effect on the outcome of your final batch. You can see here, we have a nice, light, even crush. Again, emphasizing the kernels are broken evenly and uniformly, and our husks are separated and still whole. It's important that we don't break or tear the husks too much. We want them intact so they can properly act as our filter when we go to sparge. If you're a beginner and you're buying smaller batches of grain that tend to go along with extract batches with a small amount of steeping grains that are used for color and flavor, you're less worried about the crush because those grains don't generally have a major factor in what fermentable and non-fermentable sugars you have. They're generally just color and flavor contributors. But you still want to crack those grains, you want to crush them. Again, if you don't have a local shop that will do it for you, and you don't want to invest a mill or you're in a pinch, something simple like putting those grains in a bag like this and using a rolling pin, or if you don't have a rolling pin, a can of extract like this is a nice simple way that you can break those grains open yourself in your own kitchen. One of the benefits of using a can like this is the rolled lips over here on the side actually help to ensure that you don't over crush the grain. We basically want to lay those out flat in a bag or rolled up in nice and neat in some wax paper. I prefer a bag. It's a little less messy. You don't get any stuff creeping out the sides. And basically we can take this and we can do a couple of different methods. I always like the rolling method. You'll actually hear the grains cracking as you roll over them. It's a little bit labor intensive, but if you're in a pinch, it's a simple way to do a small amount of grain. I don't recommend trying to do this with 15 pounds of grain for an all grain batch, but a half a pound to a pound for a 5 gallon extract batch is not that big of a deal. So I'm just going to take our time. We're going to keep rolling this back and forth. You can already see that I'm starting to get that crush going on in here. We're starting to see those starches breaking into their pieces and separating from their husks. We can actually move it down and around. Actually, you see as I flip it over, you can see it a lot more. We're going to now switch, we'll switch directions here in a nice heavier pile. Alternatively, and a simple tapping method like this can also work, although with a can of extract, you may want to watch that. Definitely works better with a rolling pin. But we'll keep going until we have our crush finished. You can see, after just a little bit of time working on that, I've already got a lot of what I need done. We need to get it a little bit finer, but we're really making progress. And lastly, I'd like to show you a little bit more of an advanced type of mill, which is a steel roller mill. By far, by today's standards, the most popular style of mill, especially for all grain brewers or brewers that are brewing quite often or large batches or have to process large amounts of grain, is a simple 2 or 3 roller style mill like this. This hopper here holds 11 pounds of grain. Some models are available with hopper extensions that can hold up to 40 or 50 pounds of grain. Simple rundown of how it works here. Here we have the hopper, the main body assembly that houses the rollers. This one has a base to be positioned on top of a bucket, so when you crush, you're crushing all that grain directly into a bucket and not making a mess. And here we have the hand crank handle, and the hand crank can actually be removed, and this drive spindle can be chucked into a 3/8 or 1/2 inch handheld drill for automation, or you can use a proper coupling and attach this to an external gear motor. It's important that if you're going that route, whether it be using a drill or an external motor, the goal is you want a good amount of torque because the grain will cause quite a bit of resistance on the rollers, and you don't want super high speeds. So just a quick display of the anatomy of what this is. I'm going to actually take this hopper off so I can show you the insides. There's not much to this type of mill. It's fairly simple. Here we have two 1.5 inch stainless steel rollers. Some models are available all the way up to 3-inch rollers. Some companies are also offering hardened steel rollers, similar to what we're using on our mill here at the shop. We run a lot of grain. It's important that we have an excessively durable mill. You can decide what level you need to best suit your needs for at home. You're also seeing here on the either side here are adjustment knobs, and we have some simple wing nuts here. By loosening these wing nuts, we then are able to use these adjustment knobs, and if you can see there, when I spin that, this gap between the two rollers either gets larger or smaller, and we want to, obviously, when making those adjustments, it's important we want to move them at the same rate. We want to kind of move them together. And using a set of feeler gauges, you'll set the width of your crush. Obviously, the tighter that you set this, the more you're going to tear up and pulverize that grain. The looser that you do it, the more of a coarse grind you're going to have. Once you get it set to where you like, you can do a little bit of a testing, and once you have it all dialed in, you can lock down the wing nuts, and you're good to go. We can show you how one of these works on our main mill here at the store. So this here is the mill we use at the shop. This is a simple 2-roller mill. This one in particular is 2-inch rollers. This hopper holds up to, I think, 40 pounds of grain. And it's got a simple motor mounted inside from underneath that powers it. We use a little switch here to turn it on and off. But this is obviously a little bit overkill for the average home brewer, but you'll see real fast why, if you're milling a lot of grain at home, a setup like this can really make your life a lot easier. We just pour our grain into the top hopper. Once we've loaded our grain in, we simply turn our mill on. As you can see, our final crush, nice, even and uniform, just like we're looking for. For more information about the products and services we offer, please check us out on the web.